Welcome to Heart and Mind, the four-gospel journey for radical transformation. Last week we began this series by climbing the great mountain of Matthew. In today's lesson, we'll ask, how do we move through that change? Or more specifically, how do we move through the suffering or the pain that comes with great change as we cross Mark's stormy sea? The setting for the writing of the Gospel of Mark is in Rome in the year 64 AD. A great fire engulfed the city. The Emperor Nero is complicit with this fire, as history tells us, and he needs someone to blame. Nero discovered a small Jewish community in the city that was comprised of Christ followers, and he found them to be easy targets because they worshiped and followed a figure who they deemed greater than the emperor. And so Christ followers would make the perfect scapegoat to this fire that was engulfing the city. Nero sent soldiers into the Jewish ghetto, and they had to answer a single question: are you a believer in the Christ? If they answered yes, their family would be seized and taken to the Circus Maximus and likely executed before a crowd. If they answered no, they would then need to name someone else in that community who they knew to be Christ followers. This was a genocide of people of the Jewish faith, and specifically those who followed the Christ. With this circumstance came the creation of the gospel text known as Mark. For years, the stories of Jesus were circulating in the oral and spoken tradition. But Mark took those stories and that tradition and put it into writing for the early Christian community. It was good news amidst a great storm, and it was the hope of the resurrection that would be present amidst the horror and the suffering. This was central to the Gospels and why they were called good news. The Gospel of Mark contained the stories of Christ with the persecution of Christians in the background and in its composition. It showed them a way that they could go to their death or encounter the storm or face persecution with serenity and peacefulness. It even told them how they could die with a noble presence because they knew the power of the resurrection. It's a sad and tragic backdrop to the Gospel of Mark that we don't usually think about when we open its pages. But it's necessary for subsequent generations and readers as they move through their unique times of trial to know that even the earliest Christ followers were hearing this text and found hope amidst great suffering. The text of Mark opens with John the Baptist crying out in the wilderness, proclaiming a message so powerful and so threatening to the powers that be that it hastened his own death. And so the readers are encouraged to take on this persona of John the Baptist, this character who witnessed for Christ even in dangerous circumstances. And yet the good news of the resurrection and victory through Jesus resonates through this entire gospel. Alexander Shia said that the gospel is the practice of resurrection in the midst of trauma. Mark asks, how can you walk through the valley of the shadow of death with Christ? In the Gospels and in Mark, and also at points in Matthew and John and Luke, God is giving us the power of the resurrection in this moment of wilderness, trial, and tragedy. As we continue to look at the Gospel of Mark, we notice that it emphasizes ministries in and around the Sea of Galilee. Of course, you're familiar with the Sea of Galilee through the biblical stories. The Sea of Galilee is not always peaceful. There can often be treacherous storms that come out of nowhere at any point in the day. And so that body of water was sometimes associated with death and demons and chaos. And so the disciples of Mark had to venture out into places of treachery and into the storm through Jesus' ministry. In Mark 8, Jesus invites disciples into the boat to cross to the other side, at night no less. It's crazy. It's dangerous. And sure enough, a storm approaches on the sea. Jesus is asleep because Jesus is not afraid, and Jesus is a steadfast presence. Jesus, when awakened by the disciples, calms the storm and then asks a very important question of his disciples. Why are you afraid? And where is your faith? There are other moments in the Gospel of Mark where Jesus shows his glory amidst tumultuous circumstances. In Mark 8, Jesus tells the disciples of the Messianic path, one that would lead to his own death and suffering, and that they too would be true followers of Christ when they chose to take up their cross. In Mark 11, Jesus enters the temple in Jerusalem, and with the most powerful priests and authorities looking on, upends the tables and speaks fierce truth about the money changers and those seeking personal profit in a sacred space. The Christian community, those hearing the Gospel of Mark, would see Jesus as a confident, forceful presence, encountering the storm and prevailing with truth. In the 14th chapter of Mark, we have the story of Peter's denial of Christ. 3 times Peter denies knowing Jesus before the rooster crows twice. Remember the circumstance in Rome with Nero? The soldiers asked if you would confess to being a Christ follower. You would have to face the consequences, or you would deny Christ and betray your Christian neighbor and give them away to authorities. Can you imagine being a Christ follower in Rome, hearing or reading of the story of Peter's denial of Christ, and then hearing the Roman soldier knock at your door? Will you confess Jesus as Lord, or will you deny him? The Gospel of Mark asks us, when we are faced with tremendous anxiety, uncertainty, depression, or despair, what will be our answer to this moment? Can we experience the resurrection in the here and now in our hearts? The Gospel of Mark says the answer to that question is yes. Even in such a tragic circumstance or time of suffering, Jesus is with you, calming your inner storm. Jesus is on the boat with you as you cross the chaotic sea. Jesus is with you in life's most pressing trials and challenges. It is in these moments that we have the opportunity to place all our faith, hope, and trust in the resurrected Christ. I hope that with your small group or in your time of personal reflection, you will consider these scriptures and others that are listed in your study guide. As we close this session, hear these words from Psalm 22 as we seek to be transformed in our time of suffering. Psalm 22 says, my God, why have you left me all alone? Why are you so far from saving me, so far from my anguished groans? My God, I cry out during the day, but you don't answer. Even at nighttime, I don't stop. You are the Holy One, enthroned. You are Israel's praise. Our ancestors trusted you. They trusted you, and you rescued them. They cried out to you, and they were saved. They trusted you, and they weren't ashamed. But you, Lord, don't be far away. You are my strength. Come quick and help me. Deliver me from the sword. Deliver my life from the power of the dog. Save me from the mouth of the lion. From the horns of the wild oxen you have answered me. I will declare your name to my brothers and sisters. I will praise you in the very center of the congregation. All of you who revere the Lord, praise him. All of you who are Jacob's descendants, honor him. All of you who are all Israel's offspring, stand in awe of him. because he didn't despise or detest the suffering of the one who suffered. He didn't hide his face from me. No, he listened when I cried out to him for help.